Greetings and salutations. Thank you for joining us for Fireside Tales with Wolfgang Volume 3. My co-host here, Wolfgang, is ready to snooze through some more Edgar Allen Poe classics. Well, Wolfus, how about we start with a poem? This first poem is called Fairyland by Edgar Allan Poe. Dim vales and shadowy floods and cloudy-looking woods whose forms we can't discover. For the tears that drip all over, huge moons there wax and wane again, again, again. Every moment of the night forever changing places, and they put out the starlight from beneath their pale faces. About 12 by the moon dial, one more filmy than the rest, a kind which, upon trial, they have found to be the best, comes down, still down, and down, with its center on the crown of a mountain's eminence, while its wide circumference in easy drapery falls over hamlets, over halls, wherever they may be, or the strange woods, or the sea, or the spirits on the wing, or every drowsy thing, and buries them up quite in a labyrinth of night. And then, how deep, oh, deep is the passion of their sleep. In the morning they arise, and the moony covering is soaring in the skies with the tempests as they toss, like almost anything, or a yellow albatross. They use that moon no more for the same end as before. Videlect a tent, which I think extravagant. In atomies, however, into shower to sever, of which whose butterflies of earth, who seek the skies, and so come down again, never contented things, have brought a specimen upon their quivering wings. Starting off on a bit of a uncharacteristic bright high point, but don't worry, I assure you we will hide a few bodies before the night is over. This next one reads more like the libretto of a Cure album. Alone by Edgar Allan Poe. From childhood hour, I have not been as others were. I have not seen as others saw. I could not bring my passions from a common spring. And from the same source I have not taken my sorrow. I could not awaken my heart to joy at the same tone. And all I loved alone. Then, in my childhood, in the dawn of a most stormy life was drawn from every depth of good and ill the mystery which binds me still, from the torrent or the fountain, from the red cliff of the mountain, from the sun that round me rolled in its autumn tent of gold, from the lightning in the sky as it passed me flying by, from the thunder and the storm and the cloud that took the form. When the rest of heaven was blue, of a demon in my view. You could, pave the interstate with that voice. Apparently I could pave the interstate with my voice, but wouldn't be able to see the road signs with my vision, because I swear I read that as save the interstate with your voice. That's right, I can fill potholes with my basso profundo. All right. This is an interesting one. Actually, they're all pretty interesting ones. Particularly if you're a cat and need something to sleep by. Snapping fingers, right? We're moving on to some fiction, short stories. The Imp of the Perverse, Edgar Allan Poe. In the consideration of the faculties and impulses of the prima mobile of the human soul, the phrenologists have failed to make room for a propensity which, although obviously existing as a radical, primitive, irreducible sentiment, has been equally overlooked by all the moralists who have preceded them. In the pure arrogance of the reason, we have all overlooked it. We have suffered its existence to escape our senses, solely through want of belief, of faith, whether it be faith in revelation or faith in the Kabbalah. The idea of it has never occurred to us, simply because of its supererogation. We saw no need of the impulse for the propensity. We could not perceive its necessity. We could not understand, that is to say, we could not have understood, had the notion of this prima mobile ever obtruded itself. We could have never understood in what manner it might be made to further the objects of humanity, either temporal or eternal. It cannot be denied that phrenology, and in great measure, all metaphysicianism, have been concocted a priori. The intellectual or logical man, rather than understanding or observant man, set himself to imagine designs, to dictate purposes to God. Having thus fathomed to his satisfaction the intentions of Jehovah, out of these intentions he built his innumerable systems of mind. In the matter of phrenology, for example, we first determined, naturally enough, that it was the design of the deity that man should eat. We then assigned to man an organ of alimentiveness, and this organ is the scourge with which the deity compels man willy-nilly into eating. Secondly, having settled it to be God's will that man should continue his species, we discovered an organ of animativeness forthwith. And so with combativeness, with ideality, with causality, with constructiveness, so in short, with every organ, whether representing a propensity, a moral sentiment, or a faculty of the pure intellect. And in these arrangements of the principia of human action, the Spermites, whether right or wrong in part, or upon the whole, have but followed, in principle, the footsteps of their predecessors, deducing and establishing everything from the preconceived destiny of man and upon the ground of the objects of his Creator. It would have been wiser. It would have been safer to classify, if classify we absolutely must, upon the basis of what man usually or occasionally did, and was always occasionally doing, rather than upon the basis of what we took it for granted the deity intended him to do. If we cannot comprehend God in his visible works, how then in his inconceivable thoughts that call the works into being? If we cannot understand him in his objective creatures, then how in his substantive moods and phases of creation? Induction, a posteriori, would have brought phrenology to admit, as an innate and primitive principle of a human action, a paradoxical something which we may call perversiveness, for want of a more characteristic term. In the sense I intend, it is, in fact, a mobile without motive. A motive, not a motivirt. Through its promptings, we act without comprehensible object, or, if this shall be understood as a contradiction in terms, we may so far modify the proposition as to say that through its promptings we act for the reason that we should not. In theory, no reason can be more unreasonable, but, in fact, there is none more strong. With certain minds, under certain conditions, it becomes absolutely irresistible. I am not more certain that I breathe than that the assurance of the wrong or error of any action is often the one unconquerable force which impels us, and alone impels us to its prosecution. Nor will this overwhelming tendency to do wrong for wrong's sake admit of analysis or resolution into ulterior elements. It is a radical, primitive impulse, elementary. It will be said, I'm aware, that when we persist in acts because we feel we should not persist in them, our conduct is but a modification of that which ordinarily springs from the combativeness of phrenology. But a glance will show the fallacy of this idea. The phrenological combativeness has for its essence the necessity of self-defense. It is our safeguard against injury. Its principle regards our well-being and thus the desire to be well. It is excited simultaneously with the development. It follows that the desire to be well must be excited simultaneously within any principle which shall be merely a modification of combativeness. But in the case of that something which I term perversiveness, the desire to be well is not only not aroused, but a strongly antagonistical sentiment exists. An appeal to one's own heart is, after all, the best reply to the sophistry just noticed. No one who trustingly consults and thoroughly questions his own soul will be disposed to deny the entire radicalness of the propensity in question. It is not more incomprehensible than distinctive. There lives no man who at some period has not been tormented, for example, by an earnest desire to tantalize a listener by circumlocution. The speaker is aware that he displeases. He has every intention to please. He is usually curt, precise, and clear. The most laconic and luminous language is struggling for appearance upon his tongue. It is only with difficulty that he restrains himself from giving it flow. He dreads and deprecates the anger of him who he addresses, yet the thought strikes him that by certain involutions and parentheses, this anger may be engendered. That single thought is enough. The impulse increases to a wish, the wish to a desire, the desire to an uncontrollable longing, and the longing to the deep regret and mortification of the speaker, and, in defiance of all consequences, is indulged. We have a task before us which must be speedily performed. We know that it will be ruinous to make delay. The most important crisis of our life calls trumpet-tongued for immediate energy and action. We glow, we are consumed with eagerness to commence the work, with the anticipation of whose glorious result our souls are on fire. It shall be undertaken today, and yet we put it off until tomorrow. And why? There's no answer, except we feel perverse. Using the word with no comprehension of the principle, tomorrow arrives, and with it a more impatient anxiety to do our duty. But with this very increase of anxiety arrives also a nameless, a positively fearful, because unfathomable craving for delay. This craving gathers strength as the moments fly. The last hour for action is at hand. We tremble with the violence of the conflict within us, of the definite with the indefinite, of the substance with the shadow. But if the contests have proceeded thus far, it is the shadow which prevails. We struggle in vain. The clock strikes and is the knell of our welfare. At the same time, it's this chanticleer note to the ghost that has so overawed us. It flies, it disappears, we're free. The old energy returns. We will labor now. Alas, it is too late. We stand upon the brink of a precipice. We peer into the abyss. We grow sick and dizzy. Our first impulse is to shrink from the danger. Unaccountably, we remain. By slow degrees, our sickness and dizziness and horror become merged in a cloud of unnameable feeling. By gradations still more imperceptible, this cloud assumes shape, as did the vapor from the bottle out of which arose the genius in the Arabian Nights. But out of this, our cloud, upon the precipice's edge, there grows into palpability a shape far more terrible than ingenious. By the way, it's not genie. It's actually written as genius. But out of this, our cloud, upon the precipice's edge, there grows into palpability a shape far more terrible than any genius or any demon of a tale, and yet it is but a thought, although a fearful one, and one which chills the very marrow of our bones with the fierceness of the delight of its horror. It is merely the idea of what would be our sensations during the sweeping precipitancy of a fall from such a height. And this fall, this rushing annihilation, for the very reason that it involves that one most ghastly and loathsome of all the most ghastly and loathsome images of death and suffering which have ever presented themselves to our imagination, for this very cause do we now the most vividly desire it. And because our reason violently deters us from the brink, therefore, do we, the more impetuous, approach it. There is no passion in nature so demonically impatient as that of him who, shuddering upon the edge of a precipice, thus meditates a plunge. To indulge for a moment in any attempt at thought is to be inevitably lost. For reflection but urges us to forbear, and therefore it is, I say, that we cannot. If there be no friendly arm to check us, or if we fail in sudden effort to prostrate ourselves backward from the abyss, we plunge and are destroyed. Examine these similar actions as we will, we shall find them resultingly solely from the spirit of the perverse. We perpetrate them merely because we feel that we should not. Beyond or behind this, there is no intelligible principle. And we might indeed deem this perverseness a instigation of the arch-fiend, were it not occasionally known to operate in the furtherance of good. I have said thus much, that in some measure I may answer your question, that I may explain to you why I am here, that I may assign to you something that shall have at least the faint aspect of a cause for my wearing these fetters, for my tenanting this cell of the condemned. Had I not been thus prolix, you might either have misunderstood me altogether, or with the rabble you might have fancied me mad. As it is, you will easily perceive that I am one of the many uncounted victims of the imp of the perverse. Shall return to a poem or two. This is a poem called Dreams by Edgar Allan Poe. Oh, that my young life were a lasting dream, my spirit not awakening till the beam of an eternity should bring the morrow. Yes, though that long dream were of a hopeless sorrow, 'twere better than the cold reality of the wakening life to him whose heart must be and hath been still upon the lovely earth, a chaos of deep passion from his birth. But should it be that dream eternally continuing as dreams have been to me in my young boyhood, should it thus be given, 'twere folly still to hope for a higher heaven, for I have reveled when the sun was bright. I, the summer sky, in dreams of living light and loveliness, have left my very heart in chimes of my imagining apart from mine own home, with beings that have seen of mine own thought. Sorry, Wolfers. He was dreaming dreams of high-strung morning coffee. forgive, edit, and mute this part. Yeah. Well, while I'm coughing, choking, and scaring the hell out of Wolfgang, I think I'll take a glance over into the chat here. Yeah, no. This is I promise, this isn't COVID. This is going too long in a single line without drinking a little more tea and honey. I'll be just fine. I'm quite sure this is not communicable. Oh, yeah. Pardon me. Oh. So, Miss Dari's cat Olive is watching us as well. That is adorable. By the way, Dari and Olive, Wolfgang and I thank you for the cat bed. It is wonderfully charming. Greetings and salutations, Miss Malika, and Mao to you as well. All right. A repour and refresh of the tea. And unfortunately, I have completely lost the thread of dreams, so. That one's not going to make the cut. But things that will make the cut. I've got to say, first of all, I want to say thank you to Miss Claire Bear Foster and Kim Hills for the donations to the Fireside Tailes last week. Obviously, I have not rehearsed pointing to where this appears in the camera, but that's supposed to be a lot smoother. Interestingly enough, VenturaRocks.com, Miss Pam Baumgardner did a music-related interview with me a couple of weeks ago now, and I'm told that the interview has now been posted on VenturaRocks.com. So when the Fireside Tailes are over in another little while, if you'd be so kind to go over to VenturaRocks.com and flick them a couple of thumbs up or whatever the social media currency of gratitude might be. So the interview over at VenturaRocks.com, it was a lady by the name of Pam Baumgardner, who is very active in the Ventura music scene, and Miss Michelle Hoover, who may or may not be watching right now, is the one that set this up. And Michelle Hoover called me yesterday afternoon with a fascinating suggestion of putting the Fireside Tailes on a local, what do you call local cable access? What was Wayne's World on? Whatever the equivalent of that is. Local cable. Somebody's putting this in the chat right now, I'm sure. Wait, no. It wasn't the whiskey. If I had whiskey, that would have gotten over that little frog in my throat really quickly. The best cure for a frog in the throat is to drug them. That's that's true. This is simply called Song by Edgar Allan Poe. I saw thee on thy bridal day, when a burning blush came o'er thee. Though happiness all around thee lay, the world all love before thee, and in thine eye a kindling light, whatever it may be, was all on earth my aching sight of loveliness could see. That blush, perhaps, was maiden shame, and such it may well pass, though its glow hath raised a fiercer flame in the breast of him, alas, who saw thee on that bridal day, when that deep blush would come o'er thee. Though happiness all around thee lay, the world all love before thee. Even The Cure came out with a couple of happy songs. So, back to another short story. This is one that I read in high school, and one I have not read since. By the way, looking at the chat, yes, public access. Thank you, Christina B. Unpronounceable last name. Let's see. One more to drown that frog. This is The Cask of Amontillado by Edgar Allan Poe. The 1,000 injuries of Fortunato I had borne as best as I could, but when he ventured upon insults, I vowed revenge. You, who so well know the nature of my soul, will not suppose, however, that I gave utterance to a threat. At length, I would be avenged. This was a point definitively settled, but the very definitiveness with which it was resolved precluded the idea of risk. I must not only punish, but punish with impunity. A wrong is undressed when retribution overtakes its redresser. It is equally undressed when the avenger fails to make himself felt as such to him who had done the wrong. It must be understood that neither by word nor deed had I given Fortunato case to doubt my goodwill. I continued, as by my wont, to smile in his face, and he did not perceive that my smile now was at the thought of his immolation. He had a weak point, this Fortunato, although in other regards he was a man to be respected and even feared. He prided himself on his connoisseurship in wine. Few Italians have the true virtuoso spirit. For the most part, Their enthusiasm is adopted to suit the time and opportunity, to practice imposture upon the British and Austrian millionaires. In painting in Germany, Fortunato, like his countrymen, was a quack. But in the matter of old wines, he was sincere. In this respect, I did not differ from him materially. I was skillful in the Italian vintages myself, and brought largely whenever I could. It was about dusk, one evening during the supreme madness of the carnival season, that I encountered my friend. He accosted me with excessive warmth, for he had been drinking much. The man wore motley. He had on a tight-fitting, party-striped dress. His head was surmounted by the conical cap and bells. I was so pleased to see him that I thought I should never done wringing his hand. I said to him, "My dear Fortunato, you are luckily met. How remarkably well you're looking today. But I have received a pipe of what passes for Amontillado, and I have my doubts." "How?" said he. "Amontillado? A pipe? Impossible. And in the middle of the carnival." "I have my doubts," I replied. "And I was silly enough to pay the full Amontillado price without consulting you in the matter. You were not to be found, and I was fearful of losing a bargain. Amontillado! I have my doubts. Amontillado!" "And I must satisfy them. Amontillado! As you are engaged, I'm on my way to Lucchesi. If anyone has a critical turn, it is he. He will tell me." Lucchesi cannot tell Amontillado from sherry. And yet, some fools will have it that his taste is a match for your own. Come, let's go. Whither? To your vaults. My friend, no, I will not impose upon your good nature. I perceive you have an engagement. Lucchesi, I have no engagements. Come, my friend, no, it is not the engagement, but the severe cold with which I perceive you are afflicted. The vaults are insufferably damp. They're encrusted with niter. Let's go. Nevertheless, the cold is merely nothing. Amontillado, you have been imposed upon, and as for Lucchesi, he cannot distinguish sherry from Amontillado. Thus speaking, Fortunato possessed himself of my arm. Putting on a mask of black silk and drawing a reloque closely about my person, I suffered him to hurry me to my palazzo. There were no attendants at my home. They had absconded to make merry in honor of the time. I had told them that I should not return in the morning, and had given them explicit orders not to stir from the house. These orders were sufficient, I well knew, to ensure their immediate disappearance, one and all, as soon as my back was turned. I took from the sconces 2 flambeaux, and giving one to Fortunato, bowed him through several suites of rooms to the archway that led into the vaults. I passed down a long and winding staircase, requesting him to be cautious as he followed. We came at length to the foot of the descent, and stood together on the damp grounds of the catacombs of the Montresors. The gait of my friend was unsteady, and the bells upon his cap jingled as he strode. "The pipe," said he. "It is farther on," said I. "But observe the white web work which gleams from these cavern walls." He turned toward me and looked into my eyes with 2 filmy orbs that distilled the delirium of intoxication. "Niter?" he asked at length. "Niter," I replied. How long have you had that cough? My poor friend found it impossible to reply for many minutes. Myself, I can relate. It is nothing, he said at last. Come, I said with derision. We will go back. Your health is precious. You are rich, respected, admired, beloved. You are happy, as once I was. You are a man to be missed. For me, it is no matter. We will go back. You will be ill, and I cannot be responsible. Besides, there's Lucchesi. Enough, he said. The cough is a mere nothing. It will not kill me. I shall not die of a cough. True. True, I replied. And indeed, I had no intention of alarming you unnecessarily. But you should use all proper precaution. A draught of this medic will defend us from the damps. Here, I knocked off the neck of a bottle, which I drew from a long row of its fellows that lay upon the mold. Drink, I said, presenting him with wine. He raised it to his lips with a leer. He paused and nodded to me familiarly while his bells jingled. Drink, he said, to the buried that repose around us, and I to your long life. He again took my arm, and we proceeded. These vaults, he said, are extensive. The Montresors, I replied, were a great and numerous family. I forget your arms. A huge human foot d'or and a field azure. The foot crushes a serpent rampart whose fangs are embedded in the heel. And the motto? Nemo m'impuni lacassetti. Good, he said. The wine sparkled in his eyes, and the bells jingled. My own fancy grew warm with the medic. We had passed through the walls of piled bones, with casks and puncheons intermingling, into the inmost recesses of the catacombs. I paused again, and this time I made bold to seize Fortunato by an arm above the elbow. The niter, I said, see, it increases. It hangs like moss upon the vaults. We are below the river's bed. The drops of moisture trickle among the bones. Come. We will go back ere it is too late. Your cough, it is nothing, he said. Let us go on, but first, another draught of the medic. Whew. I broke and reached him a flacon of de Grave. He emptied it at a breath. His eyes flashed with fierce delight. He laughed and threw the bottle upward with a gesticulation I did not understand. I looked at him in surprise. He repeated the movement, a grotesque one. You do not comprehend? He said. Not I replied. Then you are not of the Brotherhood. How? You're not of the Masons. Yes, I said. Yes. You? Impossible. A Mason? A Mason, I replied. A sign, he said. It is this, I answered, producing a trowel from beneath the folds of my roquelaire. You jest, he exclaimed, recoiling a few paces. But let us proceed to the Amontillado. Be it so, I said, replacing the tool beneath the cloak, and again offering him my arm. He leaned upon it heavily. We continued our route in search of the Amontillado. We passed through a range of low arches, descended, and passed on, and descending again, arrived at a deep crypt in which the foulness of the air caused our flambeau rather to glow than flame. At the most remote end of the crypt, there appeared another, less spacious. Its walls had been lined with human remains, piled to the vaults overhead in the fashion of the great catacombs of Paris. 3 sides of this interior crypt were still ornamented in this manner. From the 4th, the bones had been thrown down and lay promiscuously upon the earth, forming at one point a mound of some size. Within the wall, thus exposed by the displacing of the bones, we perceived a still interior recess, a depth of about 4 feet in width, 3, in height, 6 or 7. It seemed to have been constructed for no especial use within itself, but formed merely the interval between 2 of the colossal supports of the roof of the catacombs, and was backed by one of their circumscribing walls of solid granite. It was in vain that Fortunato, uplifting his dull torch, endeavored to pry into the depths of the recess. Its termination, the feeble light did not enable us to see. "Proceed," I said. "Herein lies the Amontillado." "As for Lucchesi, he's an ignoramus," interrupted my friend, and he stepped unsteadily forward, while I followed immediately at his heels. In an instant, he had reached the extremity of the niche, and finding his progress arrested by the rock, stood stupidly bewildered. A moment more, and I had fettered him to the granite. In his surface were 2 iron staples, distant from each other about 2 feet horizontally. From one of these depended a short chain. From the other, a padlock. Throwing the links about his waist, it was but the work of a few seconds to secure it. He was too much astounded to resist. Withdrawing the key, I stepped back from the recess. "Pass your hand," I said, over the wall. "You cannot help feeling the nitre. Indeed, it is very damp. Once more, let me implore you to return." "No?" "Then I must positively leave you. But I must first render you all the little attentions in my power." "The Amontillado!" ejaculated my friend, not yet recovered from his astonishment. "True," I replied. "The Amontillado." As I said these words, I busied myself among the pile of bones of which I have before spoken, throwing them aside. I soon uncovered a quantity of building stone and mortar. With these materials and with the aid of my trowel, I began vigorously to wall up the entrance of the niche. I had scarcely laid the first tier of my masonry when I discovered the intoxication of Fortunato had in great measure worn off. The earliest indication I had of this was a low moaning cry from the depths of the recess. It was not the cry of a drunken man. There was then a long and obstinate silence. I laid the 2nd tier, and the 3rd, and the 4th. And then I heard the furious vibrations of the chain. The noise lasted for several minutes, during which I might hearken to it with more satisfaction. I ceased my labors and sat down upon the bones. When at last the clanking subsided, I resumed the trowel and finished without interrupting the fifth, the sixth, the seventh tier. The wall was now nearly upon a level with my breast. I again paused and, holding the flambeau over the mason work, threw a few feeble rays upon the figure within. A succession of loud, shrill screams bursting suddenly from the throat of the chained form seemed to thrust me violently back. For a moment, I hesitated. I trembled. Unsheathing my rapier, I began to grope with it about the recess. But the thought of an instant reassured me. I placed my hand upon the solid fabric of the catacombs and felt satisfied. I reapproached the wall. I replied to the yells of him who clambered. I re-echoed. I aided. I surpassed them in volume and in strength. I did this, and the clamor grew still. It was now midnight, and my task was drawing to a close. I had completed the 8th, the 9th, and the 10th tier. I had finished a portion of the last and the 11th. There remained but a single stone, but to be fitted and plastered in. I struggled with its weight. I placed it partially in its destined position. But now they came from out of the niche, a low laugh that erected the hairs upon my head. It was succeeded by a sad voice, which I had difficulty in recognizing as that of the noble Fortunato. The voice said, "Ha ha, hee hee, a very good joke indeed, an excellent jest. We will have many a rich laugh about it at the palazzo, hee hee hee, over our wine, hee hee hee." "The Amontillado," I said, "hee hee hee, hee hee hee, yes, the Amontillado, but is it not getting late? Will they not be waiting us at the palazzo, the Lady Fortunato and the rest? Let us be gone." "Yes," I said, "let us be gone." "For the love of God, Montresor." "Yes," I said, "for the love of God." But to these words I hearkened in vain for a reply. I grew impatient. I called aloud, "Fortunato!" No answer. I called again, "Fortunato!" No answer still. I thrust a torch through the remaining aperture and let it fall within. There came forth in return only a jingling of the bells. My heart grew sick on account of the dampness of the catacombs. I hastened to make an end of my labor. I forced the last stone into its position. I plastered it up. Against the new masonry, I re-erected the old rampart of bones. For the half of a century, no mortal has disturbed them. In pace requiescat. So yeah, yet another hiding in a wall, and yet the imp of the perverse wasn't actually about an imp, it was about procrastination. Who would have guessed? My beast lightly snoring. Damn, seemed like it would have been a good line for a haiku. Hi. Oh, big cat, big yawn. All right. Another few poems. I just had the most exquisite memory out of the movie Edward Scissorhands. It was Vincent Price that was not only his inventor, but for amusement would read poems to Edward Scissorhands. Wow. Wow. This is called A Sonnet to Science. Science, true daughter of old time thou art, who alterest all things with thy peering eyes, why preyest thou upon the poet's heart, vulture whose wings are dull realities? How should he love thee? Or how deem thee wise? Who wouldst not love him in his wandering, to seek for treasure in the jeweled skies? Albut he soared with an undaunted wing? Hast not dragged thou Diana from her car, and driven the Hymerid from the wood to seek a shelter in some happier star? Hast thou not torn the Naiad from her flock, the elfin from the green grass, and from me the summer dream beneath the tamarind tree? So that stands out to me because I hold exactly the opposite sentiment. Science to me is a wonderful illumination at the wonders of nature. It explains away a mystery only if you look deep enough and close enough to open 3 more bigger mysterious doors. Keats, as I recall, wrote a poem lambasting Isaac Newton in a very similar tenor for removing the poetry and mystery from the rainbow. And although I love and respect Keats, the poem was written tongue-in-cheek, but I thoroughly and emphatically disagree with its thesis. We'll go out once more with a little instrumental music. And a peaceful, sleeping gray cat. And with the retirement of my beast, I bid you all adieu. Thank you very much for joining us. Oh, he's returned. So be sure to join us Thursday night at 6 o'clock for the 27th Lovecast. Can't believe how many we've done. And I think we'll do a special one of these on the occasion of Halloween. If not on the Saturday night, then somewhere around. I've been saving up a few Edgar Allan Poe specialties, and might be time to squeeze in some H.P. Lovecraft. We'll find out. In any case, the Venmo and PayPal is conspicuously over my right breast. If you are so inclined to throw into the virtual tip jar, it's greatly appreciated. And if not, it's quite all right. Thank you very sincerely for being with us and joining us this evening. See you Thursday for the next Lovecast. Good night.